Beneath the turbulent skies of early 20th century China, where the line between hero and warlord was as fragile as morning mist, rode a man into history, not with cold ambition or ruthless bloodshed, but with faith and discipline. Feng Yuxiang, the strange Christian general, did not step onto the political stage as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim through chaos, with a rifle in his hand and a Bible in his heart.
The article below has been compiled from many sources. If there are any mistakes, or if you know any interesting information, feel free to leave a comment so I can learn as well. Now, let's begin the article.
The winds of Shaanxi, the childhood of a man torn between faith and gunfire. Feng Yuxiang was born in 1882 in a small village in Sheng County, Shaanxi province. A place so destitute that the rice was never enough, the water never sweet, and the winter winds carried more dust than hope. In that barren landscape, he grew up not with the sound of war drums, but with the words of the Holy Bible from the Protestant church where his parents took him every Sunday. His childhood was not loud. There were no wooden swords or slingshot games like the other children. Instead, there were quiet evenings spent under the dim glow of an oil lamp, hands clasped in prayer. His mother was a devout woman, always believing that God would save her son's soul from the chaos of the world. But it was precisely that chaos that was knocking at the village gates, day after day. In Shaanxi, poverty arrived long before faith had time to take root. Feng Yuxiang lived in a world where kindness was not enough to withstand cruelty. He came to understand early on that the Bible could save the soul, but it could not protect the body when bandits raided the village. And so, caught between doctrine and reality, young Feng quietly learned to shoot, to ride, to stare into an enemy's eyes without flinching. Yet even when holding a gun, he never abandoned the Word of God. Perhaps that is why, in later years, people gave him such strange titles: the Protestant general, the warrior of faith, or more simply, Feng the righteous. That childhood, silent winds, poor soil, a faith quiet yet unshakable, molded a man who would forever stand between two realms, salvation and destruction. And from there, a reserved figure from the frontier slowly stepped into the heart of modern Chinese history, with one hand on the hilt of a sword and the other still holding tightly to the Holy Bible. Between sword and gospel, stepping into a world in turmoil. When the fever of revolution swept across China in the early years of the 20th century, Feng Yuxiang was no longer the quiet boy from the windswept lands of Shaanxi. After a short period of study at a missionary school, he left behind his familiar thatched roof home and stepped onto a path that perhaps even God himself could not have foreseen: the path of the soldier. In 1904, he joined the army of Zhang Zuolin, a decision that seemed to betray the peaceful ideals of his faith, yet marked the beginning of a long, paradoxical, and fierce journey. From his very first days as a soldier, Feng stood out not for brutality, but for something unusual. He did not smoke, drink, or gamble. In a unit full of violence and disorder, he was like a straight tree rising among bent reeds. His rise through the ranks came not through cunning, but through loyalty and devotion. The soldiers trusted him, cared for him, because he did not plunder the people, did not make empty promises. He gave the orders, but he also personally distributed rations and led the march through freezing winds. Within this soldier still echoed the verses of the old Bible, but he was also quick to learn the lesson of the age. Those who were not strong would be trampled. He understood fully that to protect the people, one must first possess power. And in China at that time, power came only from the barrel of a gun. After the Xinhai Revolution, he gradually built for himself a base of power, a force that was both army and congregation. He built churches inside his barracks, urged his soldiers to give up gambling, worship God, and live with discipline. This made him both beloved and feared. He was a man who carried a sword, but did not live by it. A general unlike any other in an era where every inch of land was soaked in blood. It was during this period that Feng Yuxiang began to emerge as a force to be reckoned with. He was no longer just a general. He had become a strange symbol in the fire and smoke of revolution. A devout believer, a military strongman, and a man constantly asking himself, can one achieve victory without losing one's soul? Between the cross and the revolutionary banner, Feng Yuxiang on the Northern Expedition. By the late 1920s, China resembled a tattered cloth torn apart by ambition and hatred. Yet amid this blood-soaked canvas, Feng Yuxiang, the soldier who once read the Bible by oil lamp in the dusty plains of Shaanxi, had become a central figure. When the Kuomintang launched the Northern Expedition to reunify the country, Kai-shek needed allies, and Feng, with hundreds of thousands of loyal troops and a vast territory in the north, was a choice too important to ignore. Even so, the relationship between the two men was far from a simple alliance. Chiang was a calculating military leader, determined to consolidate power. Feng believed in moral ideals, righteousness, and a new order built not only through gunfire but through faith and compassion. In an age when power was measured by the number of rifles, Feng still believed in God, and sometimes that very faith made him a beat slower on the blood-stained chessboard. Yet during the Northern Expedition, Feng Yuxiang proved he was not merely a devout believer. He led his forces to crush multiple warlord factions in Hebei, Henan, and even pushed into Tianjin. His victories not only brought the National Revolutionary Army closer to Beijing, but also elevated him into one of the era's greatest military pillars, on par with Chiang Kai-shek, Yan Xishan, and Yan Hongying. However, such power inevitably bred division. Chiang could never rest easy with a general who commanded his own army, operated independently, and, most of all, refused to fully obey orders from Nanjing. Feng Yuxiang was not a man easily manipulated. He rejected political scheming, abstained from factional purges, and repeatedly stayed neutral in internal power struggles. Eventually, by mid-1929, conflict was unavoidable. Chiang sought to sideline Feng from the political arena. Unwilling to yield, Feng allied with Yan Xishan and Li Zongren and launched the Central Plains War, a brutal fratricidal conflict between Kuomintang factions. Feng was defeated, his forces disintegrated. He withdrew to Shaanxi, returned to his hometown, took off his uniform, and lived the rest of his life as a recluse. Yet this failure did not erase his image from the pages of history. People remember Feng Yuxiang not only as a commander who once tipped the scales of power in the Republic of China, but as a quiet, austere, and solitary figure. A man who carried a cross across battlefields, clinging to the strange hope that amid bullets and ambition, there was still room for compassion. A silhouette in the cold wind, Feng Yuxiang's final years. After his defeat in the Central Plains War of 1930, Feng Yuxiang was no longer a power broker. no longer a decisive force in shaping China's destiny. He withdrew from the political center, carrying with him melancholy, regret, and an unshaken faith in humanity and righteousness. For many, this was the end. But for Feng, it was merely a new chapter, one where he lived as a farmer, a preacher, and a quiet witness to a nation in turmoil. In the countryside of Shaanxi, he built a modest thatched house, taught children, and preached the Bible to villagers. Though he no longer commanded troops, his voice still held enough weight to make the Nanjing government wary. More than once, Kai-shek sent emissaries inviting him to rejoin the government as an advisor or inspector. But Feng refused every time. He said, "I've seen too much blood, too much deceit. All I want now is the silence to pray for this nation." Yet even in silence, he could not remain untouched by the tide of history. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, then attacked Shanghai, Nanjing, and the north, Feng once again raised his voice. He wrote letters to Kuomintang leaders calling for nationalist communist unity, and publicly criticized Chiang for his first purge the communists, then resist Japan strategy. Some called him naive, but others, especially young intellectuals, revered him as a symbol of conscience. Later, when China entered full-scale resistance against Japan in 1937, Feng, though old and frail, continued writing articles and letters to stir patriotic spirit. Though he no longer led troops, he inspired many of his former officers to return to the battlefield. Rumors swirled that he had met secretly with communist representatives in Yan'an to promote a genuine alliance, but he never spoke publicly about it. After 1945, the war ended, but peace did not come. Civil war reignited. Feng was disillusioned. Neither the Kuomintang nor the communists resembled the ideals he had once followed. In 1948, summoned once again by the Kuomintang to Nanjing, he tactfully declined and chose instead to retreat fully into seclusion in Xi'an. When the People's Republic of China was established in 1949, Feng was not imprisoned or punished like other nationalist generals. On the contrary, Mao Zedong ordered his protection, allowing him to enjoy his final years in peace as a living relic of the Republican era. The legacy of a man who believed in conscience, Feng Yuxiang beneath the dust of time. When people speak of the warlord era in early 20th century China, the name Feng Yuxiang is often mentioned alongside Zhang Zuolin, Wu Peifu, and Sun Quanfang, yet his name stands apart. Not merely because he once dared to overthrow Chao Kun, the sitting president, or single-handedly built a power base in Shaanxi and Henan, but because he never lost the yearning to do what was right, in an age when rightness was often sold cheaply. He was known as the Christian general, a soldier who carried a cross beside his weapon, who eradicated opium, gambling, and prostitution from his army, and who required his troops to pray before battle. To many contemporary generals, such actions were foolish or hypocritical. But Feng showed no concern. He once said, "I cannot teach others righteousness if I do not live by it myself." A man who commands soldiers but whose heart is unsettled, no matter how large his army, it is nothing more than a disorderly mob. Feng's Ren, humaneness, was in his compassion for the people. His Yai, righteousness, lay in never betraying his original ideals. Though branded a rebel for opposing the Kuomintang, and suspected as a red spy for advocating reconciliation with the communists, Feng never changed his tune. To him, the question was not who was right or wrong, but who still held on to their conscience amid war. His choice to withdraw after the Central Plains War cost him power, but preserved his reputation. While figures like Chiang Kai-shek, Yan Xishan, or Chen Jitang faded under the weight of time and continued warfare, Feng Yuxiang remained in the people's memory as a general of the people. After 1949, when history was rewritten by the victors, he was not vilified like many others from the nationalist side. Mao Zedong, though once at odds with him, respected Feng's independence and integrity. In 1953, upon hearing of Feng's death in the Soviet Union, reportedly during a medical trip and a visit to the overseas Chinese community, Mao sent condolences, calling him a true patriot. Today, as historians revisit Feng Yuxiang's life, debates still linger. Was he an idealist so pure as to be naive, or a political visionary ahead of his time? Some say he failed because he refused to lie. Others argue that it was precisely this refusal that made him unforgettable. Whatever the verdict, when the dust of battles and schemes settles, what remains of Feng Yuxiang is not victory or defeat, but the image of a man holding a Bible, standing in the windswept storm of history, choosing compassion over power, silence over acclaim, and authenticity over pretense, in an age where such things were rarer than gold.
Thank you all for following and listening. If you enjoyed and found it interesting, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for our upcoming videos.